In July of 2025, it was reported that the CEO of Spotify, instead of paying artists more per stream, decided to take that money and spend millions of dollars on AI military drones. Not only that, but he is the CEO of a AI drone company and had no initial interest in the music industry in the first place. This is who we have running Spotify. For these reasons and many others, such as AI music, some independent artists did not like the idea of funding the military and funding war operations, especially the ones who were actively preaching peace in their own music, which obviously sounded counterintuitive and borderline hypocritical. So bands like Deerhoof took their music off of Spotify, saying how we don't want our music killing people. Plus, they weren't making much from Spotify anyways. Even Deerhoof's record label agreed with this sentiment. We are too sickened by the fact that our releases have inadvertently contributed to the global war machine. This got me thinking, what can we do as both artists and consumers to resolve this situation? Well, for one, delete Spotify. Here's a list of what you would be missing out on. 1. Spotify exclusive podcasts. If you aren't an artist on Spotify, and Spotify Wrapped, I guess, but those get worse every year anyways. And AI music, as we stated. Honestly, this section was meant to be a joke, but honestly, you wouldn't be missing out on much stuff that is actually good. If you are an artist on Spotify, remove your music from Spotify. This is easier said than done, but it is actually possible to transfer between hosting platforms, especially if you've used DistroKid for years and have gotten sick of how they also treat their artists. Okay, so basically our options are to burn it all down to the ground by no longer financially supporting them, but what's the alternative to Spotify? And that's what I wanted to discover. Is there a better way to listen to music in the age of streaming? And better yet, actually own our music? If you've known me for a while, you know that I love to talk about independent art. So the solution that we are looking for today is relatively simple: to support the independent musicians of our generation. The common alternative to Spotify is SoundCloud. This is a streaming option, which means that the free version are filled with ads, and if you're listening to an album, well, your experience is now tainted with product placement that absolutely have nothing to do with the subject matter of the album. I'll be honest, I grew up with Spotify Premium, so it's incredibly hard to go back to a freemium type music plan. So while SoundCloud is an option, you still don't technically own your music. What about YouTube Music? Well, if you have YouTube Premium already, YouTube Music is ad-free, so that is very convenient. However, I do not have that, so that is not an option for me, especially because I am so sick of the subscription model of consumerism. Like, seriously, no one should have a payment plan for a burrito. Apple Music. Need I say more? Bandcamp is almost the saving grace. You can actually buy music. They give you unlimited streaming, an MP3, or a WAV, or whatever format you want, and an actual physical version if it's available. And now you actually own the songs that you spent money on. The obvious downside to this is that it gets expensive fast, but it's a one-time payment, so you would be saving money in the long run. I tested out Bandcamp by listening to Kneecap's album Fine Art, and while I am now a fan of Kneecap, or at least this album, the ad-free experience of listening to this album was very nice. And now it's on my wish list for albums I do want to buy in the future, which, now that I'm recording this video, I actually did buy the album. Now, in a you will own nothing society, aka 2025, we need to be more cautious and conscious about what we actually own. I have a shelf full of DVDs, a phone, earbuds, and an idea. Instead of using a streaming service, why don't I just make my own personal one with the music that I already own? That's right, baby! We're bringing back the MP3 player! Now here's a very important part. Do not install an MP3 app that lets you download free music, because that is straight up piracy, which was something we will not talk about, because the last time I talked about it, I accidentally summoned a bunch of people who think if buying isn't owning, then piracy isn't stealing. But buying is owning, so piracy is stealing. Anyways, I found Eon Music Player, an ad-free music player for my phone. Now was the next step of the process, ripping all my CDs. This is actually perfectly legal, so long as I don't distribute these tracks to other people and treat them as for personal use only. What you'll need is a DVD drive, a media player, and the knowledge of which button to press to rip your CDs, aka turning your physical copies into digital copies. I used Windows Media Player Legacy, and that process was pretty simple. However, it was very tedious because I spent an entire day ripping all my CDs to my computer to turn them into digital copies. Now let me be absolutely clear. I'm not a lawyer and I cannot give legal advice. And once I rip these CDs, I can no longer sell them or give them away because that would be illegal.
Let's bring Kerry Sherman into the conversation now. Again, he's the president of the RIAA, the Recording Industry Association of America. Thanks very much for being with us. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
And what's wrong with Mark's picture?
Well, the problem is that the story is just wrong. First of all, we haven't taken the position that ripping CDs to your computer or your digital music player like an iPod is illegal. This case was about illegal downloading. It's a typical case of the many that we brought against uploaders and downloaders on Kazaa, a peer-to-peer file sharing service. And the issue was whether the defendant infringed our copyrights when he put the music files in the share folder, which allows millions of other people on the network to download the music. So we said in the brief that when the defendant ripped the CDs onto the hard drive of his computer and put them in the share folder, those copies were no longer the authorized copies we had distributed. The Post story picked up one sentence in a 21-page brief and then picked the part of the sentence about ripping the CDs onto the computer, but simply ignored the part of the sentence about putting them in the share folder.
So quoted out of context.
Yes, and had we had an opportunity to talk with Mark before the article is published, we would have pointed out that error. We never had the opportunity because although he called and we called back, he never then returned the call and made the connection, even though it was a week or 10 days before the article appeared. And, you know, this is a very complicated issue, these copyright issues, and one would expect that you would try and get some expert opinion to make sure that you've got it right. Unfortunately, the only expert opinion that I saw quoted in the article was from a lawyer who specializes in defending the people that we have sued for this peer-to-peer file sharing. He even runs a blog site called the RIAA versus the People. I mean, this is a guy obviously with an agenda. I would have hoped that we would have had an opportunity to clarify the record.
The person Mark Fisher quoted, not necessarily Mark Fisher himself,
right?
But we're going to give Mark Fisher a chance to come back.
Well, as Mr. Sherman knows, not only was the lawyer on the other side quoted, but so were statements from the RIAA's own website, as well as a statement by its own spokesman, who unfortunately didn't get back to me on a timely basis. But the fact is here that this is a case where it's not just this one Arizona case where the recording industry is making this distinction between what it says in public and what it's saying in its legal arguments. And there are, in fact, several places, including on the association's own website, where it says that if you make unauthorized copies of copyrighted music recordings, you're stealing. You're breaking the law and could be held legally liable. And as the Sony anti-piracy officer said in another case, even ripping from your own legally obtained CDs is stealing a copy. So for legal reasons, I think they are making a particular argument in these cases that is distinct from the more accommodating position that they've taken on a public policy basis.
Kerry Sherman?
I think that this just further reflects why it's unfortunate that a call back within 2 hours wasn't sufficient to reach Mark, even though the article was published 9 days later. The fact is that had he called, we would have been able to tell him that Sony person who he relies on actually misspoke in that trial. I know because I asked her, because stories started coming out immediately after her testimony about what she said, and it turns out that she had simply misheard the question, thought that it was a question about illegal downloading when it was actually a question about ripping CDs. That is not the position of Sony BMG. It is not the position of that spokesperson. It is not the position of the industry. It would have been nice to clarify that. I have told other reporters that was a misstatement by Ms. Pariser, but it never got printed anywhere because nobody thought it was newsworthy enough. But now it got picked up in this story by Mark because we weren't consulted and we could have clarified the situation.
Neil, these are not isolated incidents. This is not a reporting error. This is all over the RIAA's own website all of their public statements. Here's another one from their own website. There is no legal right to copy the copyrighted music on a CD onto a CDR. They do, and they go on to equivocate and say, well, it usually won't raise concerns if you go ahead and transfer a copy of legally obtained music onto your computer. But they're not willing to go all the way and say that that's a legal right. And that's where
let's ask him. Is that a legal right?
I think that is a question that you just can't answer in the abstract. That's the problem. There are 100 hypotheticals that you can come up with to try and come up with whether it's legal or illegal in this particular set of circumstances. And you can go down that path trying to figure it out case by case, and it just makes you realize that sometimes the law just isn't as clear as you'd like it to be. Believe me, it would be better for everybody if the law were clear. But copyright law actually relies on the circumstances of the case, the specific facts of the case, to make these kind of determinations, and you can't make them in the abstract. That's why on the website, and Mark is quoting from the portion of the website at the beginning about saying unauthorized copying is illegal and so on, but he doesn't quote from the same website just farther down the page that says specifically, when it comes to copying digital music, what's okay and what's not. And we put in there on copying CDs, it's okay to copy music onto an analog cassette, not for commercial purposes. It's okay to copy music onto special audio CDRs, mini discs, and digital tapes, but again, not for commercial purposes. Beyond that, there's no legal right, in quotes, to copy the copyrighted music on a CD onto a CDR. But burning a copy of a CD onto a CDR or transferring a copy onto a computer hard drive or a portable music player won't usually raise concerns, so long as the copy is made from an authorized original CD that you legitimately own and the copy is just for your personal use. So we're making it very clear what we think the practical guidance ought to be for consumers in terms of behavior. It doesn't really matter what our interpretation or somebody else's interpretation of the law is. We're trying to give some guidance to people, and that was ignored as part of this story.
Actually, it was quoted in the story, but I think one thing we can agree on, or I hope we can, is that the industry is relying on outdated law, and that the law really has not kept up with technology, and that's why
outdated law is still on the books. Mark.
Absolutely,
so
absolutely.
That it's not outdated.
Well, no, but law has not kept up with technology, and I think everyone in the old media can agree on that.
But it's also true that this is not something that every copyright industry or copyright owner will necessarily agree upon.
I
the fact is that music companies have been the most permissive in making clear to the public that copying for personal use is not objectionable. You can't copy a DVD just because you want a backup copy. You can't copy most computer software just because you want an extra copy. You can't copy a video game. We alone among the copyright industries have basically made clear on websites like this that this has not been objected to. If everybody engages in non-commercial use, you can still have the aggregate impact that we are suffering from piracy right now. File sharing is non-commercial use by the individuals, and look at what it's done to the industry. So we really say personal use is one thing, distribution is another, and it doesn't matter whether it's for sale or not. Once you're giving it away to somebody else, you're depriving the industry of an opportunity, the artists of an opportunity to sell their works, their songwriters to be paid royalties, the artists, the producers, all the people who have put their sweat, blood, and tears into making that music.
Even though the copyright still belongs to the artist, since I bought the CD, I do have the right to copy it for personal use. And hey, it's not even a perfect solution since some of my CDs won't even rip to my computer, so I'll just listen to those as normal CDs. So, for buying music that you actually own, I recommend Bandcamp. And for playing it without ads on your phone, I recommend Eon Music Player. Now I am actually getting some good use out of all of these CDs that are just collecting dust on my bookshelves. And I'm even gonna put some CDs in my car again, even though that's how I lost a CD, was due to a car crash years ago, and I lost my car, so that was fun, so I lost the CD too. I'm so tired of big corporations taking advantage of both artists and consumers. It's time to bring back not just physical media, but actually owning the media that you spend money on. In a world where we are constantly bombarded with advertisements and greedy corporations, let's actually help the little guys, the starving artists who are actually making art by supporting their releases both physically and digitally. And honestly, Bandcamp makes that incredibly easy. So goodbye, Spotify. You will not be missed. In a way, you've taught me a very valuable lesson about not only the music corporation, but the fact that we as consumers and artists actually have power to make changes, as long as we work together. Now, that's all I've had scripted, right? But there's been a few updates that have happened since I wrote this. And I didn't know whether to make this a main channel video or a side channel video. It's going to be a side channel video because I'm already working on a huge project for the main channel. So ever since I wrote this, I have been buying my own music. I've bought music digitally through Bandcamp. I have a bunch of albums on my phone and my computer now that I've actually bought. I spent my money on. I've been listening to a bunch of them. That's been a very fun and interesting experience there. I'm planning on buying more CDs, so I have more physical copies. Clips dropped an album and I bought that CD, which I was like, this is a 10 out of 10 album. I'm going to buy the CD so I have a physical copy of this. And I'm trying to be more intentional about buying physical copies. If there's no physical copies, then I'll settle for a digital copy. I bought like 3 of JPEG Mafia's albums digitally, but I wanted the CD, but it's fine. I'll probably find the CD at some point. But at least now I have it on Bandcamp and my phone now, so that's awesome. I've downloaded both MP3 versions and WAV versions. WAV are the higher quality versions of music. It's like one of the highest formats in terms of like listening to music, so I do that for my computer, but for my phone I just use MP3s because dear goodness, WAVs are a lot of storage. And I'm just trying to be more intentional about listening to music and buying music and owning music. So I think that's something that we could all learn from this situation is stop supporting Spotify. I'm done with Spotify, dude. And I'm honestly done with streaming music. I think that's something I've also realized. There's some artists that don't have their music on Bandcamp. If you are an indie artist, please, please, please put your music on Bandcamp, right? It's one of the best platforms to put your music on because people can actually spend money on your music. And also, if they want to stream it, well, then it's ad-free, you know? And so it's the best of both worlds. Bandcamp is the GOAT in this whole situation. That's what I've realized. And also, if you're an indie artist, say, hey, I'm an indie artist, and, you know, say I have a Bandcamp, and if you don't have a Bandcamp, get a Bandcamp. And then be like, yo, I'm an indie artist on Bandcamp, and I'll check you out. I will. I'll follow you. I will. Right? This isn't just like some rant video. I genuinely want to support new upcoming indie artists, and this is a fun way to do that too. So make a Bandcamp if you don't have it, but if you already have a Bandcamp, be like, yo, I'm an artist on Bandcamp. Follow me. I'll follow you. Let's go. Let's do it. Let's actually make this a productive conversation instead of just a rant video. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Own your music. Buy CDs. Buy digital music too from the artist directly if you can. There's some artists that aren't, so I listen to them on like SoundCloud because they don't have a Bandcamp, sadly, or CDs. So, you know, but I think we definitely need to go back to physical media, Bandcamp, stuff like that. Bandcamp is the GOAT. That's what I've learned from this whole situation. It's kind of crazy.